Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Alex. I'm a member of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway Planning Committee, and we are here with Karin Ursula Edmondson, the Master Ecological Gardener, and she is going to be speaking to us about working with your landscape, planting and care of native plants. And if you were here for her last talk, you'll know a little bit about what's happening. And if you were not, all of her whole talk is archived on the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway website and YouTube channel, so you can actually watch that at any time. So tonight she's going to be speaking to us, and then there will be a little bit of Q&A afterwards. So at any time, if you have a question, you can type that right in the bottom of your screen in the Q&A box. It'll next to the chat box. And at the end of her talk, she'll get to as many as she can. A little bit about the pollinator pathway. So it's helping to create essential and contiguous habitat in the community for our vital pollinators who are increasingly vulnerable due to things like climate change, habitat loss, and herbicide, pesticide, and fungicide use. It's part of a larger regional effort which seeks to connect pollinator gardens in the area. And the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway is a project of the Woodstock Land Conservancy, the Catskill Center, Woodstock New York Transitions, the Woodstock Environmental Commission, and members of the community. And if you want to join, or if you have any interest or questions, you can go to woodstocknewyorkpollinatorpathway.org and find out some more information. And so Karin is a landscape gardener and a member of the Ecological Landscape Alliance, which is an organization that promotes sustainable approaches to landscape design, construction, and management. And since 2008, she has been designing and building gardens in the Catskills Mountains using an ecological approach, which basically means using native plants, animals, insects, and humans kind of working in tandem to create stability, balance, and resilience. And it can minimize the need for costly inputs of material and labor and eliminate the need for chemical additives. And very importantly, gardens with ecology at heart and native plants as foundations are beautiful and biodiverse and speak to the human soul while supporting pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. So thank you again so much for joining us. And here we go. Thanks, Karin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pollinator Pathway series, working with your land, planting and care of native plants. Last 2 weeks ago, we talked about the nuts and bolts of how to design your landscape. And when I say design, you are looking to put native plants in your garden. So that is design. And the site analysis and the site inventory was to help you look at your landscape and figure out what site conditions you have, so you know exactly what plants, or at least you have a starting place of what the correct plants are for your landscape. So you have your base map. You observed and you took stock of your site. And the design is going to happen. The plants, don't think of it, you don't have to, don't get scared. You don't have to do anything like this that's on the screen at all. This is just an example, but all design happens from site analysis and site inventory. And be patient with yourself and persevere, because this is going to be an ongoing, lifelong process. I've been working in this field literally for 12 years now, and I never stop learning. Each new garden, each new project, even the old projects that I'm now managing for 4, 5, 6 years, I'm still learning. The plants and the ecology of the place and the site, they still teach me. So the same thing will be, is applicable to you. It's lifelong one never stops. Always keep observing, always keep learning. So there's 4 major site conditions, right? Really general, really major: dry sun, dry shade, wet shade. And within that, there's subcategories as well, but these are the 4 major ones that you probably know what you have at this point, if it's sunny or shady, dry, wet. And then in those 4 major, there's subcategories. Full sun usually means more than 6 hours of sun per day. And this is good for ornamental grasses, and this is good for edible gardens and fruit trees and certain sort of meadow gardens. And part sun or part shade, they're kind of interchangeable. I use them interchangeably. It means 3 to 6 hours of sun a day. And then you have your full shade, your dappled sun, less than 4 hours of sun per day. And a garden that is in dappled sun is going to look a lot different than a garden that gets more than 6 hours a day, because the plants are going to be different, because different plants prefer different site conditions. So the first thing to do, well, I mean, you've done it, is the site inventory and the analysis. And reading plant tags, in addition to the continual research and the continual observation you're going to do, really, really helps. Many of them, some tags are better than others, but many of them will at least have the amount of light and the amount of moisture, which is super important. And the zones also, they'll say the zones. And Woodstock, I mentioned 2 weeks ago, is in zone 5. So definitely buy plants for zone 5. Zone 4 is great because it's colder. I would avoid anything, purchasing any plants at say 6 or 7, primarily for the winter. Plants, with climate chaos, the extremes are more. So winter is going to be colder and summer is going to be hotter. And it's really the winter then that ends up killing the plants. So zone 5, you're safe. Zone 4 is even better. That zone 4 is where I am. Higher elevation, colder winters, etc. So plant tags are your friends, and I always keep them. I keep them for myself, and I keep them for my clients as well, for them to refer to, because there's a lot of plants out there, and it's impossible to remember everything for all of them. So here's an example of a dry meadow garden, which is full sun, and the soil is pretty dry. And there's ornamental grasses, native, there's switchgrass, what you're seeing in the front, and then there's mountain mint, and then the purple flower in the back is the bergamot bee balm. And what we did here underneath, we ran a green mulch. By green mulch, I say you're using plants as your typical wood chip mulch. Now, right after you install any of your plants, by all means, use wood chip mulch. Even we do that. And then the green mulch, under here we use sedges. There's a sedge is a native type of grass that prefers shade usually. And there's a sedge for wet shade, and there's a sedge for moist shade. There's hundreds of sedges. So they're really good green mulch. And what you're not seeing here is all the sedges that are running underneath these plants in a matrix around them to form the mulch, the green mulch ground cover. So this is another meadow. Looks very different than the prior meadow, right? That's the dry sun meadow. This is a moist sun meadow, and the plants are different. So I'm using these 2 photos to highlight the fact that the site conditions dictate what plants are going to thrive there. So here you have goldenrods. What you're not seeing is probably asters and spireas, the hardhack, Spirea tomentosa, Spirea alba maybe, and then your birches or your poplars, right? Totally different feel to this. This is why knowing your site conditions is so important. So you've already started, you have your base map, your site inventory. Keep asking questions. So for example, say you have a wet area, okay? So distill that down even more. Is this area wet all year round? Is it wet only in spring, vernal pools, such like that? Or does it get flooded after heavy rains and then it drains after a couple of days? All these questions are going to dictate, again, what plants go there and will thrive and really, really be happy and are best suited to the site. So buttonbush, which is a native shrub, the flower looks kind of like a little Jetson's white orb. Buttonbush is a beautiful shrub, native, and it has to have year-round moisture. It can also handle flooding, right? I've seen it out in its natural place, habitats where the water level, the water table fluctuates. And when I first met these button bushes, they were, they had their feet kind of maybe an inch or two of their root balls, their roots in water. And then all of a sudden 2 years ago, remember all that rain we had starting in July, and it just kept raining and raining and raining. Anyways, this particular site, the water level rose, and it actually rose 2 to 3 feet up above their root level. So these poor shrubs are basically 2/3 submerged. I mean, that's radical flooding, but, and I still drive by that site and they're doing okay. I mean, it's kind of mind boggling, but so what I'm trying to illustrate here is that button bush, if you're going to plant button bush, you have to know that where you're planting her, she's going to receive moisture year round. She's not going to be, flooded in the spring and then completely dry, bare bone in the summer. She's not going to make it. So that's why asking all those questions, right? The general questions, and then you distill it down to the really narrow, focused, clear questions are so important. Also, to illustrate Joe pieweed, it can handle moist conditions or average garden conditions too. But if they are submerged, if Joe pie roots are submerged for a long time underwater, they're not going to make it. Alternatively, blue flag iris, the native iris, you can plant in moist to average garden soil, part shade, part sun. And believe it or not, you can plant her in up to 3 inches of water around the edges of your pond. So that plant is very adaptable, but not all of them are. You can't take a plant from 3 inches of water and then put it into a regular garden. It's not going to happen. Blue flag iris is a special lady. Here's another tag, happens to be Hydrangea macrophylla, definitely not a native plant, but if you noticed, go all the way down to soil, and it says moist but well drained, right? That's important. The well drained part, read your plant tags, do the research. I cannot stress that enough. Okay, so to illustrate for an example, this was the before photo of the site on West Saugerties Road. And this is what we had to work with, right? Bluestone boulder, a little crevice. Now this garden is near to Sloan Gorge. So Sloan Gorge was an inspiration. I walked around there. I hadn't heard of it before. And wow, those gorges are massive, and Sloan Gorge is part of the Woodstock Land Conservancy. So it's actually one of my favorite places on the planet. So Sloan Gorge was an inspiration. Everything that was growing in Sloan Gorge was, and on this particular site too, there were some ferns already growing. So, so that was the starting point for it. Notice that little tree on the left. That's a chokecherry. Little, we left the chokecherry. Why not? Beautiful. See what happens. So starting with that, what you just saw, my plant choices were yucca, were native grasses, were bergamot, bee balm, and the mountain mint, all plants that can handle that hot, dry situation, right? Once established, and by once established, I mean anything that you put into the ground, that you plant in the ground, for 1 year after you plant the plant, you will have to stay on top of regular watering in order for the plant to live, thrive, and establish root systems. So when I say that plants can handle certain site conditions, like extremely dry conditions like we've been having now, that is not within the first year of after planting. You need to water to make sure that they establish properly. So, but these were the plants. You can see them containerized. You can see them laid out. This is that same rocky gorge on site 3 years later, and it's full of ferns. Way up on top, there were hay-scented ferns already growing. We added lady ferns, which like it dry too. And it didn't look like this the first year after, but slowly they fill in over time. We did add a little bit of compost, but we did not bring in any garden soil. We did not fill the gorge with soil and stuff. It was just sort of, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but the compost was for a little bit of amendment, but we used the soil on site because what's growing on site is adapted to that soil. We added more plants that would do well in that site condition. So we used the soil on site, and the compost is there to give a little nutrient boost. That's it. We're not digging out giant trenches and filling it with garden soil and then mulching. That's not how to work with native plants. You really, and again, it's counterintuitive. You work with what's on site, you work with the soil you have, because You're going to choose, because you've done your site inventory and analysis, you're going to choose the correct plants for that place. Those plants are going to be fine in whatever soil you have if you've done your proper research. Here it is again, side by side, starting, ending. Fantastic. And that little choke cherry on the left, this is her now, right? Just amazing that a tree will grow out of this, which to our mind, to the traditional gardener's mind, is, oh my God, how can anything grow in this, right? It's gravel and it looks like she's growing right out of rock. But native plants, that's what they do all the time. They grow out of places where we think, as humans, we think it is not hospitable, but it is. Here's another view of the tree now. And, you know, we prune her and shape her a little bit just for aesthetics, but that's it. Pretty awesome. Same site, the plant's thriving. You know, we watered after the, you know, that first year after install, that fall we did water. In the spring, I don't even think we watered the following year because they were just, everything was growing really well. And this is the result of the rigorous site inventory and site analysis. It's a several month long process. So again, be patient with yourself, but persevere. Keep asking questions, keep observing. And here we go a little into why native plants are okay with using the quote unquote crappy soil that we think is on site, because their roots go really deep. So they access, in times of drought right now, all the native plant gardens that we manage, they're doing fine. We're not out there watering, they're self-managing. And those roots are going really deep down. It says 10, 11, 12 feet or more into the soil to access the nutrients and to access the water, right? And that's what makes native plants able to withstand all this crazy climate chaos stuff that's happening right now. Pretty amazing. Just another visual, you know, they go deep, they get what they need. So again, you don't have to bring in all those additives of the compost and the garden soil and yards of things. No, just you know, amend a little bit with the compost, put in like a handful of compost, but use the majority of the soil on site. Also, and the reason we do use compost, just to give it a little boost, is because these plants are coming, they're containerized, they're balled in burlap, they're little plugs, they're coming from a nursery where they're getting ideal conditions. So we don't just want to take that plant that's been pampered and spoiled and put it into this rocky thing, right? Because it's going to go into shock a little bit. So we, you know, we do care a little bit, and we give it a little nutrient boost just to get established, and then they take over from there. So native plants and soils, observe where they are growing naturally, right? This is the side of my road. That's Arbor Road. And I just stopped mowing. There's field goldenrod there. There's a whole bunch of calico asters. The green mulch ground level is thyme and self-heal, prunella vulgaris, and clovers and stuff. And, you know, they're growing on the side of the road where they get salted every year. They get abused. They get just, you know, there's no love. The road crews do not go out and add compost or garden soil to the roadsides, but that's where native plants grow. So use that as a clue. Like, they can handle that. They're going to handle the soil and the conditions in your garden just as well. And here, just as an example, I took this the other evening. It looks like they're growing right out of gravel, right? Hard to imagine, but again, these, like, thyme is adapted to this. The asters, believe it or not, are adapted to it too. There's asters for dry soil, like the calico, and then there's asters for more moist soil as well. So within each plant family, there's plants for different site conditions. So again, I've been talking a little bit about this because you're choosing the plants based on your site inventory. Use the soil on site. Dig your hole, excavate, add a handful of compost, mix the soil with the compost, backfill. It's a slow release amendment. It's just a little bit of a boost, because again, they're coming from nursery productions. And here's an example of why you don't really want to use all that really, really rich soil to plant your native plants in, because, okay, so this is a rattlesnake master, likes it dry, likes it hot, thrives in that condition. This particular bed, is around a client's house, so it's a little more formal, and we did bring in some beautiful garden soil here. We did mix it with the original soil, but there is more garden soil here. And this photo was taken yesterday, and there's a lot of foliage, right? A lot of foliage, but there's no flower head, there's no stalk yet, nothing. So that's kind of what happens. Like native plants, if you give them too much rich food and rich soil amendments, you know, some will just not make it. It's too much for them. And others will just have a lot of foliage like this. And meanwhile, to contrast, same site, Rattlesnake Master looks very different. This is a self-sown one from seed. Amazing. That is growing up through a gray owl juniper, and the seed head is fully formed, and she's just happy. But notice the foliage and the stalk way down there compared to that, right? Very different. This is deep, you know, beautiful, rich soil. And this is just the clay and the hard pan that was there, and growing up through a space in the juniper. Plants will find a way, you know, they will. They amaze me every single day. They will start amazing you too. Plugs, plant plugs, definitely go to your nurseries, Catskill Native. I don't know if any other nurseries around here will order you trays, but there are some like Prairie Moon Nursery online. You can get trays of plugs, and these little plugs are very, very small little containerized plants, and they are great for dry, you know, rocky soil sites like this. Like, you want to dig the smallest hole possible, and you want to use this small little plant because her roots are still tiny enough that after you plant her in this rocky clay, dry soil, and care for her after, you know, for that first year, so she establishes roots, her roots will, because she's so little, the roots will adapt faster to the site than if you get a beautiful big plant, again, that's in a 1-gallon pot and that has this yummy soil, and then you put that yummy, coddled, pampered plant into this. Also, you're going to be digging a much bigger hole, which you don't want to do in this. Also, plugs or little saplings, if you want to do a hedgerow screening from your neighbor and you already have mature trees, you do not want to bring in an excavator. You do not want to have the excavator run over existing tree roots. You do not want to go digging holes in the forest, because for many reasons, you're disturbing existing tree roots, you're damaging them, you're undermining the health of the existing tree. Also, the new plant, the really big, beautiful, fancy new plant you're going to bring in there, for screening, a hemlock, a white pine, they're used to full sun in the nursery, right? They have that perfect shape that hemlocks never have in the wild. And then you're putting that plant that's been used to full sun in the shade, in the forest. It's going to go into shock. And then the newly introduced giant tree is going to have to compete with the established trees' roots for water and nutrients. So it's just not a good situation. But you can plant little, you know, smaller ones like this, which is much less destructive to existing root systems. And again, the little plant will adapt faster than a larger plant. And this is why you don't want to go digging in the woods to create your screening, because everything is connected underneath. We can't see it, but it is. And roots go out really, really far from a tree to the drip line at least, and then beyond. So here's a visual about all the layers in your garden. That is the ideal. Green mulch, planting in layers, using plants as ground cover in place of inputs of wood chip. Again, after you plant, don't stress yourself out. By all means, use some wood chip, but over the years, encourage even weedy plants, right? Like clovers or thymes or some grasses, anything that works for you, let them grow in between what you put in, because they will form that green mulch layer and help cool the soil, conserve water, keep other weeds down. So really everything you're doing here, all the work, the like nuts and bolts work that, you know, we talked about 2 weeks ago, you're really, you're helping nature, you're partnering with her, because you are studying what is there and using that as a jumping off point. Next few slides are just going to be inspirational. On the right, you have the red twig dogwood growing wild, and these beautiful sweets, one of my favorite things in fall and winter. Oh my God, so beautiful. Take that as inspiration. Plant the red twig dogwood in sweeps, like on the left photo. That's a cultivated garden. Use nature as the inspiration. Shade gardens, absolutely the farthest thing from boring. You don't need full sun to have a beautiful garden. The plants will just be different. You might have to approach it differently. Instead of a lot of flowers, a lot of bright blooms, go for textures. Textures are just beautiful. Ferns with the big leaf, with the grasses, just really beautiful. Woodland layers, understory trees, blooming shrubs, that ground cover layer again. Several different things going on there. Layers, if you have an open sunny area like a field or a meadow, if you stop mowing your lawn this year in honor of No Mow May, and you're going to keep not mowing a certain portion of it, fast forward 10 years, if you keep not mowing, you're going to have shrubland, and then you're going to have a small forest again. That's naturally what happens. Again, work with what you have. You have shade and moss, do a moss garden. If you're hot and dry, conifers, junipers, sunny, dry meadow. Ferns are wonderful for shade. Again, here you see the texture, the interplay of different leaf shapes, sizes, colors. Coneflower, shade garden, iris versicolor in the back, really beautiful. Texture, ferns unfolding in the spring there's incomparable beauty, really. Hot, dry situation with very little soil, you have that gravelly situation somewhere, try doing sedum. Sedum to the rescue. Wonderful for rock gardens and, again, areas with thin soil. Just magnificent. And there's so many different types of sedums. Here it's 2 different green types, and the leaf are both different. And then they also come in like a limey, neon yellow, and teal. So they're very versatile, I think very underused. And just wonderful. After they're established, they'll spread on their own, and you don't have to supplemental water them, even in times of drought like now. Clay and hardpan. This is project before, during, after. Sorry, these photos are a little old and blurry, but clay and hardpan. Clay and hardpan. Some containerized plants, and then seed mixes. Prairie Moon Nursery, excellent seed mixes. They have one for exposed clay subsoil. That's the seed mix we used here. Just, it speaks for itself. Also, don't freak out if you have a bunch of, existing traditional garden plants in your garden. You don't have to rip them all out. You could selectively intersperse the natives with what's already growing there. Like here, we did bee balm. Actually, we didn't do it, but did I? I can't remember. But the Roseanne geranium and the persicaria was there, and then the orange butterfly weed was there. I might have added the bee balm, but I didn't just get rid of what was there. Work with what you have. As long as it's not invasive, it's fine. And just add natives wherever you can at every opportunity. Here's a very formal application. We used sweet fern and northwind switchgrass, and then also traditional hydrangea. But we mixed the native plants in with the non-natives to offer some sort of habitat, some sort of nutritional value for the birds and the insects around a pool. A few basic design principles: right place, right plant. If you remember nothing, you have to remember that from tonight. Layers, massing, color, structure, focal point, repetition. I'm just going to breeze through the next few photos because I know you guys will probably have a lot of questions. Focal point, vertical accent, gold junipers, conifers that are tight and go like this. They're wonderful upright accents. So are ornamental grasses that go like that. Massing and repetition, you see the repetition of the echinacea on the left and on the right in drifts. Also the purple, looks like agastaki, and as hyssop, repeating things throughout for flow. Important. Here's that massing of the daylilies, the hot color daylilies. Bold strokes, right? If you have the opportunity to make a statement or a bold stroke, do it. This was not native wisteria, but there is native wisteria frutescens that you can plant, and then espalier and prune, like the white one there, to make a beautiful statement. Native plants. If you have a dark house, add some 9-bark. Summer wine, I think, is the one that we used here. Coppertina also, possibly we used. It relates back, the garden relates back to the house then in a nice way. And I think on that native plant diagram of the roots, 9-bark roots were going down 12 feet. Who knew? So very hardy shrub, and also very beautiful and native. Scale, right? This was a daylily slope, and we added a ton of alliums there just to hold their own against the big mass and scale of the landscape and property. Pathways, the smaller your pathway, the more intimate it's going to be. The larger, the less intimate. So play with that. I don't mind plants going out into the pathways. Some people do. Seating area is very important, right? You want to enjoy all this hard work that you're doing, and you want to enjoy watching the pollinators flit around. Plant for all 4 seasons. It's not just about flowers, so expand your mind and think it's not just about the color, but also foliage. Bark, isn't that hysterical? A little dog for bark. Berries, flowers, shape, and fragrance. Quick examples. Brown is a wonderful color to use for foliage in the garden. This is a gray smoke bush. Beautiful shrub. Lime green brightens up dark spots. Beautiful. Nice contrast with the dark green, especially for shade gardens. More lime, green foliage. Branch color, important, right? Red twig dogwood, because up here we have 7 months of winter. So you want to think about branches when you think about plants as well, especially woody plants. Here's the river birch and the sycamore. I mean, beautiful. Berries, winter king hawthorn. Before snow, after snow. Also good for wildlife, turkeys, game birds, things like that. Shapes, important. Vary the shapes in your design. Here we go. There's that upright conifer again. Beautiful sort of focal point and upright accent, and it draws your eye. Repetition. Joe pieweed, really tall. Great for moist sun and large spaces. Bee balm, everybody knows bee balm. Here's that rattlesnake master again, which is a very modern looking plant, so good for contemporary gardens too, but you can intermix rattlesnake master with more sort of cottagey gardens too for contrast. Echinacea, we all know, coneflower. Yellow, and then pale purple for the really, really, really dry sites. Penstemon, foxglove, beard tongue. Straight species in white and purple, cultivar, nativar. Good for hummingbirds and bees and hummingbirds. Really cool. Anise hyssop, bees love this, bee magnet. Self-sows, so you'll have extra plants you can spread, or just let her spread on her own. Summer sweet needs consistent moisture. This is a plant that needs consistent moisture in shade and in sun. But if you're going to plant her in sun, has to have consistent moisture. We planted these here in a very wet, swampy area, very kind of unappealing there, created by the boulder stone walls, and we put the summer sweet in, and they just loved it. Gold cone juniper again, really beautiful, upright, vertical, native. Roses, I use a lot of native roses, pasture rose, Virginia rose, prickly rose, because they're so hardy. They offer so much benefit to birds for nesting sites, and also the rose hips for larger birds and other mammals and us humans. Rose hip, and the flowers are beautiful. And once established, those roses will just keep spreading on their own and form thickets. It's really wonderful. You do have to protect them from deer a little bit, believe it or not. You have sun and dry, sweet fern and Sunny Boulevard, St. John's wort, really adaptable, really tough as nails plant that offers so much benefit. Sweet fern is a big moth, attractant. You want to think of moths when you create your pollinator garden, because moths come out and pollinate at night, right? Native grasses, just amazing. Deer proof, deer proof, deer proof. Native grasses, great and beautiful. Does this remind you of anything? This kind of looks like the Miscanthus sinensis that everybody plants and then it runs away, runs out of the garden and can become a nuisance. 2 native ones, switchgrasses, Cloud9. I'm forgetting the other one, but so if you like that look of the Miscanthus and you don't want Miscanthus, there's a native grass for that. Indian grass, kind of looks like Carl Forrester a bit, but native, self-sower, like prolific self-sower, wonderful grass, beautiful. Little blue stem, prairie dropseed, again for more dry sites. Finely textured foliage, absolutely beautiful. Also, if you have limited room, sometimes all you need is 2 to 3 plants. In each of these photos here, the first one on the left is oak leaf, hydrangea, and ferns. That's it. Second one, allium and coneflower in the foreground at least. And an ornamental grass. And then black cohosh, ornamental grass, and coneflower. Like, you don't need to go nuts, really. This is all very beautiful, and it's just 2 to 3 different plants. Woodland edge garden, a lot of ferns, looks like huckleberry, low bush blueberry, some spruces. Again, not a lot of color going on, but really beautiful, very of the place. Conifer garden, round, upright, flying trillium. I think she's open by appointment, this nature preserve, to go visit now for inspiration. Perennial beds, again, that massing, the drifting and the massing of plants. Instead of buying just 1, buy 3 and plant them all together for that effect. Fringe tree, that's a little white tree on the left, really beautiful, getting more widely available now. Beautiful leaf, beautiful little scented white foliage in spring. Schubert's red chokecherry, nice if you like the dark leaf plants. Pagoda dogwood, this is a really young one. She's a lot bigger now. Big bird attractant, also pollinator attractant for the flowers, and then birds for the berries. Serviceberry, one of my favorites, 3-season interest, 4-season, if you count the vase shape in winter, but berries, good luck trying to get them. The birds usually get them before humans do. Flowers early in spring, one of those trees and shrubs you see flowering in May, like before anything else is out, that's serviceberry if you're driving around. Okay, and then don't forget to make friends with the weeds. And I mentioned this earlier. I could do a whole thing on just working with the weedy plants on site. Technically, the definition of a weed is a plant that you don't want in a certain location. So a really expensive English rose shrub could be a weed if you don't want her there in that place. But these little weedy plants make great green mulch. More than that too. This is a big list, but really good book to get for IDing all those weedy plants. I love that these people, Peter Del Tradici, he's a professor, and his student crew went out and ID'd plants that are surviving in the super harsh, polluted environments of cities and urban spaces. So that's it. Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure, again, to be here with you. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. I'm going to do the stop share right now and hand it back over to the ladies from the Woodstock Pollinator Pathways.
Thanks so much, Karin. This is Joan Apter.
Hi, Joan.
See if I started my video. I have the Q&A box in front of me, and I think I'll start with some of the questions that came in advance. I'm interested in harvesting seeds from native plants to grow in my yard. Do you know of any good online or print sources that cover this subject?
No, but I'll make a note. I mean, not off the top of my head right now, but I will. Oh, the Seed Savers Handbook by Nancy Bubel. There you go. There's one. Seed Savers Handbook. Nancy, Nancy Bubel. Bubel. Bubel.
Okay, and maybe somebody can type that in the chat. That would be helpful. Second question, and thank you very much for that. I've had problems with voles eating the roots of my plants. Are there native plants that voles and similar creatures do not like?
That's a good question. The very first install I ever did, I planted Baptisia in front of a stone wall, and within a week, every single Baptisia plant was gone. Not so much, I mean, the roots too, but roots that are scented, they tend not to like, so you could try and plant things like alliums, onions, garlic around those plants that they're eating. Also, when you're planting the plant, you could sprinkle cayenne pepper in the hole. But no, if you have a really bad vole problem, I think, except for the ones that are really, like the roots that are really scented, they won't touch. But yeah, it's kind of, sometimes nature doesn't do what we want her to do.
That's the way the vole crumbles. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
In a native landscape, how can you overwhelm and eliminate the invasives when the natives seem to grow more slowly?
Remove.
Go ahead.
Cut back, remove, pull out. Definitely. That's like an ongoing thing no matter what. I mean, so in one of the gardens we were just at this week, there was a, what is that? Asian bittersweet, that vine with the orange berries that goes up and chokes trees. There's no bittersweet on this site. And all of a sudden, 5 years later, there's a bittersweet vine. Where does she come from? The birds somewhere. Somebody dropped a seed. And so even in this like pristine, where we planted all these beautiful native yummy plants and stuff like that, 5 years later, in comes an invasive. So it's a constant, you're going to be dealing with invasives and things that birds drop into your garden for the rest of your gardening life. So.
Okay, that answers that. So, because she was saying, some people say don't pull the invasives because it disturbs the ground, but that takes care of that.
Well, you can also just cut back, like barberries, a lot of times, I mean, digging out is the best thing, but those barberries have giant root systems. So any plant that you keep cutting back constantly, like you cut the barberry to the ground, she's going to send up new little green shoots. You cut off those little green shoots over and over and over again, so she sets no more green. She can't photosynthesize. The roots are not going to get nutrients. The roots will die eventually. So it's a lot of cutting back, old-fashioned cutting back. That's it.
In a landscape that was mostly non-native grass, I have allowed large areas to keep growing. I have added a few things, but mostly have watched for 8 years. My changing landscape has evolved to include huge numbers of milkweed, which I enjoy, a scattering of mullein, plus various grasses. Is this the right approach, a hands-off one, or must the meadow be shaped?
That's up to you. I mean, if the natives are starting to come back in like that, then, say, mullein can be aggressive, and you might have at some point a field of mullein that's not to your liking. So then you just edit out, right, certain ones, and it's going to change from year to year because nature is never static, ever. So that is entirely a personal choice to you. At some point, you might want to shape and edit.
Okay.
Yeah.
As native plants mature, do they ever become less enticing to deer? I have had to cage every native plant that I put in, so my yard looks more like a collection of cages and less like a collection of plants. My property is impossible to completely fence.
I like to think they get less, that the native plants get less appealing. I know that we've had deer, like, it's kind of, I mean, without knowing how big your landscape is, like the more native plants you plant, you like in a meadow situation or with shrubs and grasses and perennials that's sort of very full and voluptuous, you will notice the deer browse less, right? But deer, you know, any sort of new plant you put in, like at one garden, the one with the really rocky soil, the first, you know, we put in yucca. Yucca is labeled as deer resistant. Like nobody, even nurserymen were saying they don't eat yucca. They came and they nibbled on the yucca. It was a new plant. So we sprayed that year with the deer off that winter. And then, and they didn't touch it, and they haven't. 4 years later, they don't come back. You know, deer are unpredictable. The cages are an eyesore. You know, it's plant a lot, make it really full if you can. Again, I don't know your site. I don't know if you planted trees or shrubs, one tree with a cage, or if you planted a patch of meadow grasses, perennials, I don't know.
I'm gonna go to the Q&A box. Judith asks, do wood chips have to be aged? I will have a lot of fresh pine chips this year.
I think so. One of my arborist friends kind of mentioned that, yeah, because there's a lot of dampness in freshly cut or chipped. I mean, unless it's a dead tree, right? A standing dead tree that's been around for a while and that's chipped, that'll probably be a lot drier than a live tree that was cut and chipped. There's gonna be a lot of moisture in those wood chips and possibility for disease, like too much moisture. So yes, I would age your chip pile for a bit, kind of like compost or manure or something like that.
Thank you. Pia asks, on the side of your road photo, usually it's mugwort, not the beautiful composition you've shown.
Yeah, that depends. So mugwort has started. I have no mugwort along up here. There's also no poison ivy, so it's kind of rare. But the mugwort is starting to grow now by my fire pit. I don't know why. She hasn't ever been there before, but yeah, I don't have mugwort. I just have the field goldenrod and the asters and things like, you know, it depends. Again, each site, each roadside, each garden is different.
Cal asks, if you're planting large drifts of single species, doesn't that mean that most of the season you won't have color there? I learned somewhere that you should plant things that bloom at different times, but it sounds like maybe that doesn't apply here. Thanks.
No, of course it applies. Yeah, I mean, large drifts, I mean, 3 plants. Yeah, definitely vary. You know, don't do a monoculture of all echinacea or something like that. Mix up the plants, early spring blooming, late spring blooming, early summer blooming, late summer, fall blooming, some of the like ironweeds and some of those goldenrods. Actually, there's a lot of native goldenrods that bloom really late. Like there's gardens we manage in end of September and October, they still have a little bit of color in it, you know? So again, that's where the research comes in. There's no easy way, unless you hire a designer, but even for the designer, there's research and studio time and site inventory and analysis involved. It's a complex process. The more you do it and the more you learn and you observe and you work with different plants, the more you're gonna, the more of an expert you're gonna be.
Thank you. And Judith asks, are service berries okay with deer?
Yeah, I haven't, but again, you know, if you're in like an area with high deer pressure, they might come and check out the new plant you put in, right? In my experience, there hasn't been a lot of deer nibble on it, but the places where well, no, that's not true. There's been deer pressure, but so yeah, it all depends. Sorry to say, it all depends. The only plants that are 100% deer resistant are ornamental grasses, barberry, boxwood, burning bushes, and St. John's wort. St. John's wort is that little, that round sunny boulevard. They don't eat that. I don't know why. But other than those invasive and boxwoods, which is not native, not invasive, and handy in some design situations, deer will eat what they want to eat.
I have 3 last questions.
Okay.
I know it's 7:58. Do we have a little grace period for coming in a few minutes late?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm game if you are.
All right, we'll just do the last three.
Okay.
Is there a native evergreen that could form a hedge along a roadside that would not be eaten by deer and would reach a height of 6 feet or so?
You know, questions like this, I hesitate answering only because there probably are, but you know, off the top of my head right now, no, and I don't know your site conditions. So do the research.
Okay. I hope you'll mention some plants for poor, sometimes rocky soil and sun and or shade, which you did mention in the slide.
I did, yep. And in the handouts, which you will be receiving at some point, I will, all the plants that were listed in this slideshow will be listed there. So you have some sort of reference point.
Oh, wonderful. And last, is Rosa rugosa, is it rugosa?
Yeah, yes.
Rosa rugosa, a good pollinator plant?
Yeah, I think so. She's not native. Salt spray rose, I think China, but I interplant native with the rugosa rose because the rugosa rose, oh my God, you can't beat those rose hips. They're so big and beautiful. The native Rosa virginiana and Rosa caroliniana and the prickly rose and the swamp rose. There's even a rose for swampy situation. Can you believe that? They have hips and a lot more of them, I think, than rugosa, but they're a lot smaller. So I like to, just for ornamental, I put rugosa and I put native Virginia, Carolina, swamp, prickly in with them.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much, Karin, for this presentation, as usual, filled with information. I'm excited that there's going to be handouts. I would like you all to check in your chat box. There's some things that have been put there for you to copy, or you can go to Woodstock NY Pollinator Pathway.org. That's www.woodstocknypollinatorpathway.org. And you'll find all kinds of information there. The email is there. I think the email is also in the chat box. Check our website for future events. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and making this such a special event. Thank you, Karin.
My pleasure. Good luck, everyone.